The old man didn't flinch when they cuffed his hands, just looked straight ahead, quiet, as if used to being judged. Someone in the courtroom snickered. A juror whispered, "Just another troublemaking old man," but they didn't realize the shackled figure once finished a fight with one bullet, and the only one that could vouch for that was getting out of a black SUV with 4 stars on his shoulders. Where are you watching from? Type your city name, and if you think justice delayed is still justice, hit subscribe. Welcome to Deep Story Dispatch. Tom Granger had been maintaining the Veterans Memorial in downtown Memorial Square for exactly 11 years at 74. His body bore the invisible weight of decades, but his hands remained steady. Every morning at 0700 hours, he arrived at the small granite monument tucked between the courthouse and the public library. The memorial wasn't grand. A simple stone bearing the names of local servicemen and women who had given their lives most. People walked past without noticing it. Tom noticed everything. He carried the same worn canvas bag each day, filled with cleaning supplies he purchased with his modest pension. A soft brush for the carved letters, metal polish for the bronze plaque, fresh flowers when he could afford them. His movements were methodical, almost ritualistic. Tom never spoke about his past. The neighbors knew he was a veteran. The bearing, the regulation haircut, the way he folded his flag each evening gave him away. But which war, which branch, which battles, that remained a secret on this Tuesday morning in March. Tom was polishing the bronze plaque when raised voices disturbed his routine. 2 young men, college-aged, stood near the memorial, arguing loudly about something Tom couldn't catch. "Politics, probably. Keep it down, boys," Tom said quietly, not looking up. "Some folks are trying to remember people who can't speak up for themselves anymore." The taller young man, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and expensive sneakers, turned toward Tom with irritation. "Mind your own business, old man. This is a public space." "It is," Tom agreed, still working, "which is why we all need to respect it." The argument resumed louder now. Other pedestrians began to notice, some stopping to watch, others crossing to avoid the commotion. Tom straightened slowly, his arthritic knees protesting when he stood to his full height. Something in his posture suggested he was not a man to be dismissed lightly. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying, despite its quietness, "I'm asking nicely. Please take your discussion somewhere else." The shorter young man stepped forward aggressively. "Or what you'll call security. Look around, Grandpa. You're all alone here." Tom's eyes fixed on something beyond them, a third person approaching, fast phone in hand, clearly agitated. Tom recognized the signs. Elevated heart rate, tunnel vision, poor decision-making about to follow. "Move aside," Tom said, stepping between the arguing pair and the approaching figure. What happened next would be debated later in court. The third person, a young woman Tom had never seen before, claimed she was trying to intervene when Tom shoved her, causing her to stumble and scrape her knee on the pavement. The 2 original arguers, suddenly unified against a common target, supported her version within 3 minutes. Patrol cars arrived within 5 minutes. Tom found himself pressed against the memorial he attended for over a decade, hands cuffed behind his back. While curious, onlookers raised phones to record the arrest, assault, and battery. The young officer announced importantly, "Unprovoked attack on a civilian." Tom said nothing. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the only appropriate response when truth seemed irrelevant. As they led him toward the patrol car, he took one last look at his memorial, his cleaning supplies scattered on the ground, his daily routine shattered. The county courthouse holding cell was nothing Tom hadn't experienced before. Though the circumstances were different this time, he sat on the metal bench with perfect posture, hands folded, eyes fixed on the opposite wall. The other detainees gave him a wide berth. Something about his stillness suggested depths they didn't want to explore. When the public defender arrived, Tom recognized the type, young, overworked, already mentally preparing for the next case. "Mr. Granger," the lawyer said, consulting his file, "I'm David Martinez. I'll be representing you today. The good news is that the injuries are minor, probably community service if we can work out a plea deal." "I won't be pleading to anything," Tom said quietly. Martinez looked up, surprised. "Most elderly defendants were eager to avoid jail time, sir. With respect, you were caught on video. Multiple witnesses saw you push Miss Henderson. The officer's report is very clear. The report is accurate about what he saw." Tom agreed. "Doesn't make it true, Mr. Granger. Sometimes the truth is less important than what can be proven in court. The prosecution has video evidence, witness testimony, and a police report. What do we have?" Tom studied the young man's face. "We have the truth. That might have to be enough." 2 hours later, Tom found himself in Judge Patricia Walker's courtroom, still wearing the same clothes from his morning at the memorial. He sat at the defendant's table with his hands folded, his bearing suggesting a man attending a lecture rather than his own trial. The courtroom buzzed with quiet energy. Word had spread about the crazy old man who had attacked a young woman at the war memorial. Several spectators held phones hoping to capture a moment worth sharing. Case No. 2024 CR 1847. The bailiff announced People versus Thomas Granger assault and battery. In the fourth degree, Judge Walker glanced at Tom with the weary expression of someone who had seen too many similar cases. Another elderly defendant acting out, probably seeking attention. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Officer Bradley Patterson, fresh-faced and confident, described arriving at a scene where multiple witnesses reported an unprovoked attack. The victim, Miss Sarah Henderson, was attempting to mediate a dispute when Mr. Granger physically pushed her to the ground. Patterson testified several bystanders confirmed this account, and cell phone video corroborates the physical contact. Miss Henderson took the stand next her, knee still bandaged for dramatic effect. She described feeling threatened by Tom's aggressive posture and claimed she was only trying to help when he violently shoved her. "I've never been so frightened," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "He looked so angry, so dangerous." The cell phone video was played grainy footage that clearly showed Tom's hands making contact with Henderson, followed by her falling. The context was unclear, but the physical contact was undeniable. As the prosecution rested, Tom remained motionless. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, probably suggesting plea negotiations, but Tom's expression never changed. "Mr. Martinez," Judge Walker said, "does your client wish to enter a plea?" Tom stood before his lawyer could respond. "Your Honor, I don't need anyone to speak for me. They'll remember me or they won't." A ripple of confusion moved through the courtroom. Judge Walker frowned. "Mr. Granger, I strongly advise you to consult with your attorney. With respect, Your Honor, I've said all I intend to say." The jury exchanged glances. Several looked impatient, ready to deliver the obvious verdict. "Why does he keep standing like that?" One juror whispered, "Like he's in the military or something. Probably stolen valor." Another replied, "My brother says lots of old guys pretend they were soldiers to get sympathy in the gallery." Teenager Marcus Collins had been half watching while texting his father, but something about the defendant's bearing caught his attention. The way Tom held himself, the faded outline of something metallic on a chain around his neck. Marcus raised his phone and zoomed in. The image was blurry, but he could make out what appeared to be military dog tags. He quickly sent the photo to his father with a message. "Did I weird trial happening? Does this look like real military to you?" Captain Robert Collins, USMC, retired, was in a meeting when his son's text arrived. Something about the image made him excuse himself. He enlarged the photo, studying the defendant's posture, the way he held his shoulders. Then he saw the dog tags. Robert Collins had spent 30 years in the Marines. He knew how real veterans carried themselves, and he knew the difference between authentic military bearing and civilian imitation. The man in his son's photo wasn't pretending to be a soldier. He was a Marine captain. Collins stepped outside and made a phone call to a number very few people possessed a direct line to someone who owed him a favor. "Sir," he said when the call was answered, "I need you to run a name through the classified database. Thomas Granger, approximately 74 years old, appears to be former military." 18 minutes later, a black SUV with government plates pulled up outside the courthouse. The vehicle had no visible markings, but its occupant carried enough authority to stop traffic. With a gesture, he said nothing, but made everyone go silent. "If you think silence is sometimes stronger than any defense type," Silent General David Kern stepped out of the SUV with measured precision. At 62, he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had never lost a battle that mattered. The 4 stars on his shoulders caught the sunlight as he strode toward the courthouse entrance, causing pedestrians to stop and stare. Inside, the trial was proceeding according to schedule. The prosecution had rested, the defense had waived evidence, and Judge Walker was preparing jury instructions. It was a simple case with a predictable outcome. An elderly man would soon be convicted of assault. Tom Granger sat motionless at the defendant's table, hands still cuffed, expression unchanged. Several jurors were already mentally composing their verdict. Miss Henderson sat in the front row with her bandaged knee displayed, occasionally dabbing at her eyes. The courtroom door opened quietly, and General Kern entered without fanfare. He wore his dress blue uniform with full decorations, ribbons and medals that told the story of a career spent in dangerous Places his presence was magnetic. Conversation stopped as people turned to see who commanded such attention. Judge Walker looked up from her notes. Recognition flickered across her face. She had seen this man on television testifying before Congress. This was General David Kern, architect of Operation Eagle Flame, the strategic mind behind the most successful counterterrorism campaign of the decade. Your Honor, General Kern, said his voice, carrying clearly, I apologize for the interruption, but I have information relevant to this case. The prosecutor stood uncertainly. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The case is nearly concluded. Sit down, Judge Walker said firmly. Her attention focused on the General Kern. Please approach the bench. As the general walked forward, every person in the courtroom rose instinctively, except Tom, who remained seated with his hands cuffed. When General Kern reached the front, he did something that stunned everyone present. He came to attention and rendered a perfect military salute directly to Tom Granger. The silence that followed was profound. You could hear the air conditioning humming the distant traffic, the barely audible whisper of people holding their breath. Tom, still handcuffed, managed to return the salute with a slight nod, an acknowledgement between warriors that transcended circumstances. General Judge Walker said uncertainly, "What exactly is happening here?" General Kern turned to address the courtroom. Your Honor, members, the jury, everyone present, you are in the presence of one of the finest Marines who ever served our country. He gestured toward Tom. This man is Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Granger, United States Marine Corps, veteran of 3 tours in Vietnam and 2 classified operations I cannot discuss in open court. The prosecutor started to object, but General Kern's raised hand silenced him in 1971 during Operation Dewey Canyon 3. Then Corporal Granger was attached to my unit as a designated marksman. We were pinned down by enemy fire in a valley near the DMZ, taking casualties with no hope of extraction. The general's voice remained steady, but emotion flickered across his face. Tom Gunnery Sergeant Granger identified the enemy sniper who was trapped one shot from an impossible distance in impossible conditions. That single bullet ended the engagement and saved 17 lives. He turned back to Tom, including mine. The courtroom remained frozen. Several jurors were openly staring there earlier, assumptions crumbling. Miss Henderson looked confused and uncomfortable. Sensing the narrative shifting, General Kern reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box. After that operation, Tom disappeared from our unit, transferred to classified. Operations that don't appear in any public record. I've been looking for him for 30 years. He opened the box, revealing a military decoration that gleamed under the lights. This is the Silver Star that should have been awarded to him in 1971. Political considerations and classification requirements prevented the ceremony. Then the general approached Tom's table. If this man is a criminal, then I am a man who has spent his career following a criminal's example. Judge Walker found her voice general. Are you saying this defendant is not who the prosecution claims? I'm saying General Kern replied that Thomas Granger is exactly who he appears to be. A Marine who has spent his life protecting others, asking nothing in return. He looked directly at the handcuff figure. Tom has been maintaining that memorial outside because the names on it include men from our unit. Men whose families never knew the full story of how they died or who saved them when they were wounded. The general's voice softened. He's been standing guard over their memory for 11 years. Not because anyone asked him to, but because Marines don't abandon their brothers. Tom spoke for the first time since the trial began. The memorial needed tending. Nobody else was doing. General Kern nodded, just like Tom, always doing what needs doing, never asking for recognition. He turned back to Judge Walker. Your Honor, I request permission to present evidence that will provide context for these events. The judge nodded slowly. The court will hear your evidence. General Kern gestured toward the door, where 2 Marines in dress uniforms had entered carrying file folders and surveillance equipment. The incident at the memorial was recorded by 3 security cameras. The general announced the footage shows Gunnery Sergeant Granger placing himself between agitated individuals to prevent a physical altercation. When Miss Henderson approached rapidly from behind, Tom moved to intercept what he perceived as a potential threat to bystanders. The prosecutor stood weakly. Your Honor, this is dramatic, but it doesn't change that the defendant made physical contact with the victim. General Kearns smiled grimly. You're right, it doesn't change that fact. It explains it. The Marines began setting up a laptop and projector. What the cell phone video doesn't show What none of the witnesses understood is that Tom wasn't attacking Miss Henderson. He was protecting her from walking into what was about to become a violent confrontation. The security camera video began playing. The footage was clear, showing the entire sequence from an elevated angle. Tom's movements were visible in full context. The way he positioned himself, the careful way he guided Miss Henderson away from the conflict zone, the gentle nature of the contact characterized as violent assault. Marines are trained to assess and neutralize threats. General Kern explained what Tom saw was a rapidly deteriorating situation with civilians at risk. He did exactly what his training demanded. He protected innocent people. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as truth unfolded on screen. Miss Henderson's face had gone pale, her testimony now contradicted by objective evidence. Judge Walker called for a brief recess to process what had transpired. As the room emptied, General Kern approached Tom, who remained seated, still handcuffed. "Tom," the general said quietly, "I'm sorry it took me so long to find you." Tom looked up with eyes that held decades of unspoken stories. "You didn't need to find me, sir. I wasn't lost." "Maybe not," General Kern replied, "but you were forgotten, and that's on all of us." Officer Patterson, who had made the arrest, stood uncertainly. Near the back, the confident swagger he had displayed earlier was gone, replaced by uncomfortable realization that he had handcuffed a genuine war hero based on incomplete information. Officer General Kern called to him a word. Patterson approached. Reluctantly, his face flushed. "Sir, I had no idea who he was. The witnesses all said you did your job. Based on the information you had," the general interrupted. "No one is faulting you for that. But now you have different information." The general's tone wasn't harsh, but it carried authority. "What matters now is how you respond to new facts." When court reconvened, the atmosphere had completely changed. Word had spread about the morning's revelations, and the gallery was filled with courthouse employees, local attorneys, and curious citizens who had heard about the Marine being honored. Judge Walker returned with the bearing of someone who had spent the recess re-evaluating everything she thought she understood. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began in light of new evidence and testimony, "I am instructing you to disregard the prosecution's case as presented. The evidence clearly shows that Mr. Granger acted not as an aggressor, but as a protector." She turned to the prosecutor. "Does the state wish to continue with these charges?" The prosecutor, recognizing a losing battle, stood and shook his head. "The state moves to dismiss all charges." "Your Honor, motion granted." Judge Walker struck her gavel once. "Mr. Granger, you are free to go." She paused, then added, "Officer Patterson, please remove Mr. Granger's restraints immediately." Patterson moved quickly to unlock the handcuffs, his hands shaking as he freed Tom's wrists. "Sir," he said quietly, "I apologize for the misunderstanding." Tom flexed his fingers, then looked at the young officer with understanding rather than anger. "You couldn't have known, son. But now you do." As Tom stood, General Kern approached him carrying the velvet box containing the silver star. "Tom, this is long overdue." The general opened the box and carefully pinned the decoration to Tom's shirt, the same civilian clothes he had worn that morning. The silver star gleamed against the plain fabric, transforming Tom's appearance from confused elderly defendant to what he had always been, a decorated veteran who had served with honor. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Kern announced, "I present Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Granger, Silver Star, recipient, Purple Heart recipient, and one of the finest Marines I have ever served." Alongside, the entire courtroom rose in spontaneous applause. Judge Walker stood behind her bench. Officer Patterson came to attention and saluted. Even the court reporter had stopped typing to clap. Tom stood quietly amid the recognition, his military bearing more evident now that people knew what to look for. He wasn't comfortable with the attention, but he accepted it with the dignity of a man who had earned every moment of respect being offered. Miss Henderson, the alleged victim whose testimony had started this ordeal, approached Tom hesitantly. Her bandaged knee suddenly seemed theatrical rather than tragic. "Mr. Granger," she said, her voice small, I'm sorry, I misunderstood what happened." Tom studied her face, then nodded. "Fear makes people see things that aren't there, sometimes no harm done. But there was harm," she insisted. "I accused you of attacking me when you were trying to help, and now you know different." Tom replied simply, "That's what matters." General Kern watched this exchange with approval, even in vindication. Tom remained who he had always been, a man more interested in moving forward than dwelling on past wrongs. As the crowd began to disperse, a local newspaper reporter approached General Kern. "Sir, can you tell us more about Sergeant Granger's service record?" "What I can tell you," the general replied, "is that Tom Granger represents the best of what America asks of its young people. He served when called, fought when necessary, and then came home and continued, serving his community in quiet ways no one noticed 1 week later. The memorial in downtown Memorial Square looked exactly as it always had, clean, well-maintained, respectfully tended, but now a small bronze plaque had been added near the base. This memorial is maintained by Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Granger, USMC Ret Tempimani Silver Star recipient. We failed to recognize him for too long. We will not forget again." Tom had protested the plaque, arguing that the memorial should honor the dead, not the living, but the city council had overruled his objections every morning. At 0700 hours, Tom continued his routine, clean the stone polish, the bronze tend the flag. But now occasionally other veterans joined him. Word had spread through local VFW, and American Legion posts and a quiet brotherhood had formed around the memorial. Officer Patterson stopped by one morning during his patrol, parking his cruiser and walking over to where Tom was working. "Morning, Sergeant," he said, offering coffee. From the shop down the street, Tom accepted with a nod. "Morning, officer. Quiet. Night quiet enough," Patterson replied. "I've been thinking about what happened in court." Tom continued his work, waiting. "I learned something that day," Patterson continued, "about making assumptions, about taking time to really see people instead of just looking at them." "Good lesson," Tom agreed. "Took me a while to learn it myself." They stood in comfortable silence, watching morning commuters hurry past the memorial, most still. "Didn't notice," Sergeant Patterson finally said. "Would it be all right if I stopped by sometimes? Maybe learned about the people whose names are on this monument?" Tom looked at the young officer and saw genuine interest, rather than obligation, be honored. "To tell you their stories," Tom replied. "They deserve to be remembered by someone besides an old Marine. The heroes among us don't always wear their medals, but they're there standing guard when no one's watching. Share, if you believe in giving recognition, where it's long overdue. You can't measure sacrifice by age or worn clothes. Some people have been silent too long, not because they're weak, but because they don't need to be heard." Thomas Granger never asked for recognition. He simply showed up every day to honor men who couldn't speak for themselves when the system failed him, when assumptions replaced investigation, when his good intentions were twisted into criminal charges. He remained silent, not from fear, but from dignity. Sometimes it takes a 4-star general to remind us that heroes walk among us wearing civilian clothes, carrying invisible wounds, performing invisible service. They don't ask for parades or medals or public thanks. They ask only not to be forgotten and not to have their motives questioned when they continue doing what they've always done, protecting others. The next time you see someone performing quiet service, maintaining something others take for granted, standing guard over memories others have forgotten, helping without expecting recognition, remember Tom Granger. Remember that the most important stories often remain untold until someone with enough authority speaks up for those who won't speak up for themselves. Have you ever seen someone misjudged, then vindicated? Share that story below. Some truths deserve to be told. In the light, subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where quiet heroes get the recognition they've always deserved.